On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, we head to the World Internet Conference in Murai Jun to check out the latest breakthroughs transforming the Internet.
We have not seen the limits of what it is capable.
The Internet is celebrating its 50th birthday, having been nurturing an interconnected world. Accomplishing its future missions are not without challenge. CGTN joins hands with the World Internet Conference to present you Wu Talk. What is the future of the Internet? And what is our future with the Internet? Not only a trip back in history with thinkers, movers, and shakers, but one journey into the future with all of you. Hello, and welcome to Wu Talk from the World Internet Conference. I'm Tian Wei. They say technological revolution usually takes about 50 years, or at least 50 years. Well, think about it. That's about half a century, exactly the time the Internet has been with us. While we are celebrating its 50th birthday, there are a lot of questions that in our mind. The technologies are neither good nor bad. They're neutral. It really takes human being to make the best out of it. So there are questions that we, together, have to answer collectively. What are these questions? Well, will the Internet begin to evolve in new directions? What could be its biggest breakthrough yet? And can we surf on the wave of the future digital revolution? Those are profound questions which I do not have the capacity to answer, and fortunately, we have a very strong panel with us who are capable to handle all of these issues. And I'm honored to be joined here by a very strong panel. They are Mr. Zhou Hongren, Executive Vice Chairman from the Advisory Committee for State Informatization. Mr. Stephen Wolff, Principal Scientist, Internet 2, member of the Internet Hall of Fame. Mr. David Farber, Distinguished Professor and Co-Director of Keio University Cyber Civilization Research Center, and also member of the Internet Hall of Fame. Last but not least, Jim Murai, Professor from Keio University, member of the Internet Hall of Fame. What do you make of it? I mean, 50 years already. Think about it. How much change, what do you consider as the biggest change it has brought to us? Professor Farber, can I go to you?
Okay. Well, obviously the changes have been dramatic. I think it's interesting to ask the question of what underlying technology caused the changes and what are its implications in the future. John and I will step on each other's toes if we're not careful, but I consider probably the most underlying technology in the last 50 years to change things is the arrival of the microcomputer. Back at the early days of the Internet, the computer would damn near fill this room, or at least fill the stage. Many computers were big, expensive. They were only available for the universities and companies that could afford it. As soon as when the PC came out, the IBM PC, and kids up at MIT brought over the Internet protocols to it changed everything. And it became now something that you could see happening to the house. Now, early on, it was acoustic modems that did all that, but that changed.
Professor Murai, you were looking at me, and it seemed to suggest you're trying to say, well, that's only one aspect of the change. I have more about that.
Well, actually, there is two aspects. One from a technological very much, and then another is more social. The first one is when we started the Internet, then it was called the wired, right? So wired means the wire is connecting the computers, and the computer networks was connected by a wire. And then look at after 50 years, then most of the connectivity here is a wireless, so unwired, right? So this is one of the things that we didn't expect when we started the work about connections. And then, now everybody, so amazing infrastructural development for the wireless technology supporting today's internet. And then, this is related one, and still the social one. So when we developed the internet was for us, right? We are using it, so we trust each other. So we don't think very much about the computer, cybersecurity thing, because we trust each other. That was for us, and now it's for everyone. So internet is for everyone, certainly.
Mr. Wolff, I have to go to you because you were pioneering in a way in transforming the internet from only government use, government projects, to more societal and academic usage. Now, I'm sure you have seen the history from a very different light, Mr. Wolff.
Indeed, I have. I think.
And don't I love that voice? That's radio voice.
I think one of the reasons for the spread from us to everybody was a simple matter of economics. And that is that the academic community couldn't afford to extend the technology as far as they wanted it to. And so, per force, we brought in commercial entities, and they, in effect, brought the internet to everyone.
And now, do you like the change it has made?
Most of it, yes.
Interesting. Most of it sounds very diplomatic. There are a lot of words behind it. Professor Wolff, go ahead.
Most of the things that we take for granted on the internet, the things that we do, the e-commerce, connecting with our friends anywhere they are. Social networking is an extreme phenomenon, and we have not seen the limits of what it is capable. We have seen that it is very good for bringing groups of people together, but it also has a multifaceted dark side. The ability to coagulate public opinion in pernicious and evil ways, the weaponization of social networking by nation states. So this is something that we didn't even think of, right? Even though we believe that the internet was revolutionary in being the first communication revolution. You start with the telegraph and telephone and radio and television. Internet was the first one that was a many-to-many communication system. But we never imagined the power of social networking.
And that has a lot to do with the so-called Metcalfe's law, isn't it? Which is counting the effectiveness of the internet by looking at the pure number with which it is being operated and being used.
The value of the network increases as the number of people connected increases is certainly very valid.
Mr. Zhou, what would you like to say? The pros and cons of the internet. What do you consider the biggest win, and what do you consider as the biggest challenge now?
I think the biggest winner is the people. I think the dramatic changes the internet brings to us is the globalization. You see, people to people, you can communicate anytime, anywhere, and the whole Earth just become what we call Earth village. So that's not happened before in human history. So, and also over the last 50 years, the functions of the internet have changed dramatically. It's not only for telecommunication. It's not only for email. Now you can send your money everywhere. You can buy goods anywhere. You can talk to anyone, anytime, anywhere. So that's, I believe you never think about it before, right? Right. Yeah.
The convenience it has brought.
Yes. And so I think this is a time globalization, no one can reject it. No one.
Yeah, actually, that's a really important point about the internet. Because the internet means a single internet in the world, right? And then also, yeah, you mentioned about the Earth, right? This planet and the human being and all the history of a human being on this planet. And then we didn't have such a thing like in a truly global space where the human being can interact and work together. So this is the very first space the human being ever, kind of own.
Yeah.
This is a global space. So before that, then when the civilization coming from the various places and the coexisting together, sometimes conflicting together, that's a kind of a nation-state model, right? International model. So we do have an international space, but now we have a global space as well. So obviously, today is a kind of overlapping of those two spaces, right? So this is a very important point, I agree.
Maybe there's conflict as a result of that, too, as a result of these so-called two space. One is so-called a nation-state. The other is a globalized space. Mr. Farber.
Yeah, that's clearly been a problem. And it was not a predictable problem. As we got to be able to talk to more people, nation-states started being twitchy about it. Although that happened before, but not to the scale. There were problems when the first transatlantic cable came in. There were historic problems. Anytime you improve communication, you get tremendous benefits and you get liabilities. And society in general manages to get out of that. The internet is probably one of the first cases where it really reached down to the individual across national boundaries, across basically continental boundaries. And so we've created a new type of civilization. Well, I mean, in the past, there were two options, right? You either learn to live together or you end up destroying each other. And I think that's still up in the air. There are a lot of worries because, in fact, the internet creates friction lines. As Jun said, the lack of security produces potential risk, which could end up in a catastrophe, or it could end up in a worldwide civilization. I don't think there's going to be much in the middle.
Interesting. Mr. Wolff?
Well, there's no question about the attempted internationalization that the internet has caused. And the tensions that it caused within and among nation states is all too palpable. But I think there have been nation states for a long, long time. And nation states have over the years evolved a method for resolving conflicts and differences in interest. The treaty organizations, the United Nations, the ill-starred League of Nations, of course, but the point is we need to start invoking the classical schemes that nation states have developed for dealing with one another and apply those lessons to cyberspace.
Can we? I mean, it's still very difficult for anyone to have a so-called collective willingness to even develop some rules, some mechanisms. I mean, we've been trying for a long time. We have the UN people sitting here. They know how hard it is to put all these people together and agree on anything, not to mention particularly the internet.
I think it's a test to human beings.
How are we doing with this test, by the way, Mr. Zhou?
I think it takes time. We have to be patient.
But can't we learn faster, Professor Farber?
I think it's going to be very hard to run faster. We've been looking at...
Even with the help of you guys?
Even with our help. Human beings are human beings. A simple thing, privacy. Okay? That has so many definitions. I live in Japan now. Japan has its definition of privacy. The U.S. has its definition. The Europeans really have its definition. And they're not compatible. And it's going to be very difficult because privacy strikes very hard at the individual, less at the nation state. In law, we don't have a consistent cyber law. Now that we might be able to solve, but it's, even there it's hard because it intrudes on nation states' rights.
Logically, we do have a kind of global space beyond the border of a nation state, which is academics, science, and those things, right? And then, remember the internet started from the connecting the older research institute and the universities, which is basically the borderless space called the academic space. Academics should work together with the economic finance people and other people, national security people. There, we do have a two space together, and then so. From each of the side, then learning is important.
It's almost a perfect world, Mr. Murai, if I could remind you that you are describing right now, that everybody come together, we learn a little bit more about the other side, and let's design the rule. That's not exactly what the reality is. Mr. Wolff, since you're courageous enough to face the reality, let me ask you about that. There is geopolitics, even though very traditional, it still come into play. It is also the debate about the globalization, the side effect of globalization, the divide that all the technology has been creating, as well as the role of companies vis-a-vis the role of governments, the civil society. So how do you see these very different layers of players, and on the other side, the very different layers of challenges, how to mix them up together, be able to come up with something, Mr. Wolff?
I'm glad you don't ask me a hard question.
Yeah.
I think the temptation is to think that the internet is wholly new, and the issues that we face have never been seen before. And I think that's not true. The place of the individual in society, the function of groups, of corporations, those have been. So the internet. It has some new things, and social networking is that. But we need not neglect, need not throw aside the mechanisms that society has developed for resolving these kinds of issues and resolving conflicts. I heard a quote on CNN, I guess, a couple of days ago from John F. Kennedy from 1962. He said, we must do this, not because it's easy, but because it is hard.
You're watching Wu Talk from the World Internet Conference. We'll be back after this. But there is a divide, Mr. Zhou, if you look at it. Various societies, there's a very big divide among different social groups about how much knowledge they have about what they have in terms of negotiation with the other players of the society, about their own access to the rules. And that's exactly what we are saying right here and why we are designing this topic today. Mr. Zhou, how do you see that divide within society, between countries, in the globalized world also?
Well, the divide, I think, is always there. But what we have to do is to bridge people, to bridge the countries, so that we can reduce the gap. You see, in terms of access to the internet, in terms of benefit from the internet, right? So.
But once again, is how?
Yes, I think mainly the international cooperation is very important. In particular, I hope United Nations could play a key role in terms of this, and also the civil society can do a lot, like the enterprises, like the commercial leader, Mr. Ma Yun, I think she can do a lot, right? Also, the big government can do a lot from each country. They can pay more attention to the development of the digital economy, in particular for today's situation. So I think this is an issue of development, but not an issue of the internet.
So how is China handling it, since you're coming from China?
Unfortunately, I have to say that over the last 10 years or more, the digital divide in China is getting larger
Why?
and larger. Yeah.
In what sense?
Why is it? I think in terms of east part or the west part, actually both of them are moved very rapidly in terms of to embracing the internet. But the problem is that the east coast goes very fast, but the west coast they start delayed. So that when the east coast goes very fast and the west coast just start. So the gap from the small and become larger. But if we take another 10 to 20 years, I think the gap will become smaller and smaller.
Really?
Yes.
What is backing your confidence?
Prayer.
I'm quite confident.
Professor Farber.
Yeah, just addressing one thing. Nation states have learned slowly to collaborate. Realize that we just came out of a century with 2 world wars that killed millions and millions of people. And still in the world we have wars. So the nation states haven't really learned that much about getting along together. And in fact, if they do the wrong thing, the result is much more tragic than it was during the 20th century. But let me throw another thing in just to destabilize everything. Okay. We have the internet. We also have more and more powerful computers, right? And we're probably in the next 20 or 30 years, we'll have another breed of computer, quantum computers. Now, they won't operate the way these machines, but they'll probably operate in conjunction with. That and what's commonly called AI, which isn't AI yet, but is very powerful, puts additional destabilizing things in the mix. The economy, the work environment of many people, the jobs many people have are going to vanish. And whether we can educate them for the new jobs fast enough is going to be an interesting problem. And you see that, beginning to see it all over the world. The lawyers are going to be very difficult with eventually the way AI is going now. At least the number will be down. Many jobs will be changed dramatically. And so, there has to be a merger. I think it has to be a merger of what I'll use the term, although I used to hate it, social science, looking at the way societies operate, and technology, understanding where it's going, and in an environment where they can talk to each other. Now, the academic world is a great way to try that. We're going to try at Keio. Other schools are trying it too, but it's hard.
Yeah. Professor Murai, I go to you also. We all know the urgency. But the question really is, even with the urgency, various players are reluctant to come together. So what do you think can be the starting point if we can have something done at least?
Well, actually, it's always well, I'm very much optimistic in that sense. I mean, solving the divides and everything as well. Your current question as well. So when the issue is there, and then solution would be there if we have a way to solve them, right? And then the innovation on the internet space is very much kind of promising in the past. So if you have an idea, and then sometimes borderful, so any issues, domestic issues, can be solved in some innovations with a global space, right? So that kind of solutions can solve many of the problems, right? So think about the financial inclusion thing, right? And then it used to be a currency and the domestic nation relationship, but if something new on a global things happening, that's kind of dangerous, but also might be helpful in terms of purpose of financial inclusion, which is basically solution for the divide.
emphasizing on the positive side and maybe find some common ground to begin with. Mr. Wolff, is that the way to be? And what is the common ground you consider?
I think we have to work to find a larger common ground than we have so far.
We see the reluctancy of some countries to still be part of a global mechanism. I wouldn't name names because it's still a process, but unfortunately some of those countries are very big economies and they are also front row players of technologies as well. So Mr. Wolff, how do you see the rest of us could do as a result of this reality?
Well, I guess I said at the plenary that nation states have their norms, and every nation will attempt to govern itself to keep its government safe and to keep its citizens safe. The methods that are used for that will vary, and the effects will vary. And I do not expect that the internet will look the same everywhere. We used to think it would. We hoped it would. But the reality is it won't. I think, contrary to what our president said, globalization is the wave of the future. And one effect of the globalization is the mushing together of norms of the participants. So I think over time, we may well see the internet start looking more and more global than it does today. But I don't think that is I think that is a process that cannot be forced.
That's a process.
It is a process of that is part of a larger socialization and globalization process throughout the world.
Evolving, in other words, is still an evolution. Mr. Zhou?
Yes, I quite share your point. I think it's a process. I think, you see, we should like the people know that the development of China will not hurt anybody, any country. We will actually benefit all over the world. I think there are some misunderstanding or some misjudgment from politicians. If we look back the history of China, not even over the last 1,000 years, China, our nationality is not aggressive. Actually, we are quite conservative. And we almost pay attention to our own development to improve our people's life.
Let me ask you about the future, since we are here talking about the 50 years and probably 50 years ahead in the future. What's likely do you consider as the trend of the technology related to the internet? Professor Murai, you want to go first?
Okay.
Briefly.
Well, okay. You mentioned about the kind of a common ground, and then some of the nations are not, prefer the global space. But what we have done so far is economics, right? Then any nations want to be not to be as a part of the global space, but they want to be a growing economy, and that is a mission of the nation, and which is very much supported by the global space.
Next stage of technology, what is it?
Right, and then so the purpose is internet inclusion. So we still have 40% of the people are not accessing the internet, which is to achieve that goal. Then we really need the technology of not existing infrastructure, but also the new infrastructure from non-terrestrial network technology, from the air and other things, to cover the entire people and the entire.
Are there some specific
region.
trends you have in mind that would help us to achieve that? What exactly is it?
Okay, this year and 25, coming 5 years, then there is a technology called non-terrestrial network technology coming, and so the technology covering the globe from the air type of a technology, so including satellite and the airplane. So those technology can do the drastic change on the coverage of the internet.
I see. Very interesting. Professor Farber?
Yeah, I guess all the things, computing will advance, communication will advance, technologies to deliver will advance. I think the thing that will probably have the best long-term impact are things as simple as effective working ability to translate on the fly. Okay? When I talk to a person in China, it's very difficult. I don't speak Chinese, they don't speak English. If computers can negotiate that, if we can read each other's stuff, if we can talk to each other. I remember years ago, the president of NTT wanted to be able to pick up his phone, this is many years ago, and call the United States and talk in Japanese to an American who would hear it in English. We're getting very close to that. And when we arrive at that point, another barrier falls. And that could be a major thing. The other thing I would point out...
So you're talking about the Internet of Things in a way, because it's mainly computer to computer rather than human-computer interaction or human-to-human interaction.
Yeah, well, it's human-to-human mediated by computers. The other thing that I would point out is that we're very bad at predicting. And I think if you look carefully, nobody that I know at least predicted what would happen. I used to comment, if we did, all of us would be richer than Bill Gates. We just did not understand what was going to happen. And technology has that habit. It races away, and your imagination doesn't quite work, especially technologists. They tend to be rational.
So you're advising all of us, okay, take note of what I just said, but then ignore it and throw it away.
No, I didn't say ignore it. But be willing to change your mind at an instant. Never fix a goal, because it will change rapidly. And there are so many technologies that are going to apt to come.
Absolutely.
Including real AI. If we can do that, everything changes.
The Internet is celebrating its 50th birthday, having been nurturing an interconnected world. Accomplishing its future missions are not without challenge. CGTN joins hands with the World Internet Conference to present you Wu Talk. What is the future of the Internet? And what is our future with the Internet? Not only a trip back in history with thinkers, movers, and shakers, but one journey into the future with all of you. Mr. Zhou, let me go to you. What do you consider as the future trend? You are coming from, among all the panelists, coming from a developing country and also from one that is having a huge population, 1.4 billion. So there's something that you are seeing that might be different from, let's just say, the other friends?
My view is for the next 25 years, I feel the most important thing for the development Internet is the Internet of Things, the global Internet of Things. That means the current Internet will be expanded to cover not only the computers, not even the smartphones, but also a lot of things, maybe 50 billion, 100 billion, 200 billion, and so on. So that will bring next dramatic changes to the world. So not only people, and people can talk to each other, but also things and the things. They can automatically talk. So I think that will change the world also dramatically. Yeah.
Where is China in that, in the development of the Internet of Things?
China?
Yes.
I would like to say that the most important infrastructure for the global Internet of Things is 5G. And at this time, I think we can say China is playing a leading role. We go a little bit faster, but not too fast, but just a little bit. Yeah.
Mr. Wolff, since you are the next to answer that question, once again, I have to throw a harder question at you. 5G, ding! Well, there's something that people can immediately imagine and relate to geopolitics once again. So how do you think will the trend that these gentlemen just mentioned will be free or relatively freer from geopolitics for the future? Or actually, it's going to be the real limits on us to work on something better? Mr. Wolff.
I don't understand that question. I'm sorry.
US and China, can they work together on 5G, for example? That's as direct as could be.
I hope so.
From a scientist perspective, really.
From a science perspective, of course. From the political perspective, it's up in the air, isn't it? So, but I would like to address the technology question. I agree with Mr. Zhou that the Internet of Things will make an enormous difference in the way we live and the way people interact with each other and with their environment. But I would like to point out a small advance. One of the, I'm stuck on social networking. Maybe I've been bitten too often. But one of the insidious effects of social networking on adolescents has been studied, quite extensively. Adolescents suffer from poor self-image because they get depressed, they have anxiety, all these things, partly because of the limited form of communication you get, even with WeChat, right? Even with WhatsApp. I think with the advent of effective virtual reality, this will introduce a new generation of social networking applications, and it will allow the human-to-human interaction to more nearly replicate that of being person-to-person, right? In which the computer will disappear, and the person that you're interacting with will be the one that you interact with. So the interaction will be more natural, and the deleterious effects of social networking will be reduced. But I'm an optimist.
Will that be pushing us further apart or bring us closer?
Closer together.
You think so?
I think so, yes.
Well, at least that's a very positive note. No, Mr. Farber is going like this. Wonderful. We have some debate at least.
And it could go any number of ways. Sure. And a lot of it is going to depend on their education. Right? If I look at my grandchildren, small sample, they basically rejected social networking. They just don't use it. And more young kids are beginning to veer away from it. But by the way, social networking, as Steve knows, is not new. We had an equivalent in the U.S. which did an incredible amount of damage. It was called talk radio. Remember talk radio?
Yes.
It was a pernicious, destabilizing thing which affected and still affects parts of the country. But in fact, we learned somewhat to deal with it.
But how come all you find problematic are the things that are most popular in the society? Does it mean the scientists are just going against the trend? Does it mean what?
No, we throw out samples, right? And we try to improve on it. On social networking, I think virtual reality, AI, even what's called AI now, can contribute an awful lot by creating a better environment in which to operate. Right now, it's people to people without any real mediation. AI, again, I hate that term, but properly used can provide a mediator. And you can talk, this is not the place to talk about what many of the problems are with social networking, but a mediator can help an awful lot, and we don't have it right now. That could make a profound, we'll experiment. That's what science is. We experiment.
We will experiment. That's at least what we can do.
Well, actually, the new technology like those could be focusing on a kind of a more specific domain, like kind of a medical, technology, right? And then if virtual reality and the augmented reality is going to be used for the operation of the medical use, and then that's going to be a excellent technology to improve the kind of a medical ability. And then also when they're connected, then it's going to be a completely, it's possible that completely changing the kind of space of the health of the human being for the future.
Well, we are running out of time. How time flies, just as 50 years of internet already behind us, probably more, 50 more ahead of us. Before we go, I want to invite every one of you to share with us maybe one sentence of insight and prospect. What does the internet mean to you and its future? One sentence. I'll leave you for the last, and let's begin with Mr. Murai. Professor, one sentence if you can.
Okay. The future of the internet should be created by all the participants, everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the internet gave me a worldwide set of friends, and that's continuing, and that's been its most valuable impact on me.
Mr. Zhou?
Okay. One word, one internet.
Okay. Last but not least, Mr. Wolff, you've been thinking about it carefully, and now what it is?
I look forward to the day when the internet really is for everyone.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for being with us. And this is Wu Talk from the World Internet Conference.